embarrassment, a discomfort that is not heard, but that fills the air like dense smoke. It was supposed to be a celebration, and it was, at least for some. The most exclusive restaurant in the city seemed to have been designed so that everything there whispered superiority. The soft light, the silver cutlery, the floral arrangements millimetrically positioned, the ambient music calculated not to disturb anyone. No children in sight, no error allowed, no off-the-beaten-path emotion. Until he showed up. He, the son of the honoree, a black boy, about 12 years old, with cerebral palsy and a stubborn smile on his face. He arrived pushed by a silent caretaker, wearing a white shirt too starched for his fragile and crooked shoulders. The body did not follow commands precisely, but the eyes, the eyes searched everything around with a hunger that hurt, hunger for belonging, hunger to be a part. But the world there served another menu, French exclusion, in discrete portions. His father, a tech mogul, a symbol of success, a man of firm speech and controlled gestures, made his speech about legacy and future. Everyone applauded, except for his son, who tried to clap to the rhythm of the music without succeeding. His movements generated lateral looks, people trying not to look, but looking. Embarrassed smiles, no real reaction. It was as if he were a dissonant note in a social score that did not foresee human failures. A waiter approached to adjust his father's glass, dodging the boy as if he were part of the furniture. The absence of contact was glaring. Even the most progressive in the room preferred polite silence to true approximation. Nobody said anything, but everything said, "This is no place for you." And it was in this forced silence that something broke. It broke, but not with a bang. With delicacy, with courage. A young black waitress, with hair tied in a high bun and eyes that saw more than they would allow, approached. She came with a napkin, but what she handed was a gesture, a whole smile, straight to him, not of pity, but of encounter. Really, of those who know what it is to be read wrong. Every day. She didn't say anything. He just looked. He looked at it in a way that said, "I see you." And that boy, for a moment, straightened his torso, as if that look lent him a column, as if, finally, he really existed in that space, in that restaurant where everything was made to shine. She was the one who turned on the only light that mattered, but no one there knew that that small gesture of humanity would turn the world upside down. Expectation. There was a visible difference between the way the boy's eyes sought connection and the way his father deflected feelings he couldn't name. The man at the head of that table, visionary, billionaire, decorated, was also someone who had long since learned to lock his emotions inside invisible vaults. His presence was admired, respected, feared, but her silence in front of her own son screamed louder than any applause. Distance. It was not the wheelchair that separated father and son. It was the absence of intimacy. The boy, in his stubborn innocence, tried to follow his father's every word, every gesture, every laugh, but the man never looked directly at him, perhaps not out of cruelty, but out of custom. He grew up in a world where feelings were considered weaknesses, where vulnerability was a risk to authority, and now, in front of a son who did not live up to the projections, he became a stranger within his own blood. Silence, the kind of silence that isn't calm, it's thick. The waitress still watched, from a distance, while she performed her duties. He brought dishes, collected glasses, listened to orders, but his eyes were not detached from the boy. She could tell something no one there seemed to notice. This boy wanted no mercy. I wanted to be included. I wanted to laugh together, be a part of it, to exist like any child, with freedom to make mistakes, with room to shine. Performance. That night was not a celebration. It was a spectacle, and the father was the protagonist of a play written by himself. Speech ready, compliments rehearsed, smiles of someone who knows that everything will be reported the next morning, but he lacked soul. There was a lack of truth. The boy, with his trembling movements and his contained joy, clashed with the perfect script. It was like a note out of tune, who insisted on staying. Memory. Perhaps the father knew, deep down, that he was missing something precious. It wasn't the public's admiration that he already had. It was the bond with his own son, which slowly unraveled, like a photo left in the sun. Every minute he moved a little further away from that small universe that the boy carried in his eyes. And then, something almost imperceptible happened. The waitress paused, for a second, in front of the mirror in the hall. He looked at himself, and he saw more than his reflection. At that moment, something that no one expected began to be born. Tension. The waitress's presence was beginning to bother her, not for what she did, but for what she aroused. She didn't speak loudly. He didn't interrupt anything, but his look said too much. She continued to work, but there was a vibration in her gestures that clashed with the polite coldness of the salon, as if she carried a song that only she heard, as if her body knew something that the rest of the environment was trying to forget. Initiative. Between one plate served and another, she noticed that the boy was trying, with great effort, to reach the glass of water. The arm did not obey properly. The hand trembled, but there was an insistence there that hurt because it was so beautiful. He wanted to do it for himself. Do not ask. Not depending. Just get it. The father, too busy in his circle of compliments, did not see it. The caregiver, trained to act only when requested, remained motionless. It was she who bent down, without fanfare, and helped the boy hold the glass firmly, a minimal gesture. But that, for that boy, it was a pact, resistance. For a second, he smiled at her, and she, not knowing where, smiled back with teary eyes. But the connection did not go unnoticed. One of the restaurant managers called her discreetly in the corner and whispered something dry, something that reminded him, "Don't get too involved." The waitress nodded, but inside her something had broken. She knew, if she backed off now, she would be agreeing to the erasure. And she knew this feeling well. To be useful, but invisible. Of being apart, but never belonging. Courage. Then she came back, not to challenge anyone, but to do what my heart told me to. The ambient music, sophisticated and distant, still played, but she ignored it. He took 2 empty glasses from the tray and carefully began to bang them together, creating a rhythmic, soft, and fun sound, as if he wanted to transform that hall into a stage, as if to say, "Let's play, just for a moment." Attempt. The boy understood. His eyes lit up. He tried to keep up. He moved his arms clumsily, out of time, almost knocking over the chair. A scare, a stumbling block. One almost cut the scene like a knife. Some people laughed, others frowned. The father turned around, finally, not to applaud but to interrupt. He raised his hand, but said nothing. The boy, not understanding, stopped. The smile broke in half, and for a moment, it seemed that shame would win. But it was in this near failure, in this near silence, that the waitress decided not to go back. And that's when fate wrote its part. Decision. She did not back down. I could have pretended that nothing had happened. He could have returned to the timed routine of dishes and orders. But no. He stood there, facing the boy, glasses in hand, with a twinkle in his eyes that defied any rule. He began to play a more marked, lighter rhythm, as if inviting to dance without using words. The hall was suspended. The conversations have slowed down. Some cell phones began to rise discreetly. The boy understood, not with the body, still limited, but with the spirit. This was his chance. His arms moved out of step, but with intent. His fingers, crooked and hesitant, tried to keep up with the improvised beat. And even when he made a mistake, he smiled. It was a smile that said, "I'm here. I exist." And this time, no one laughed. Something in the waitress's eyes called for silence, but not censorship. A silence that listens, that respects change. The father, sitting, watched, for the first time, not knowing what to do. He didn't know the lyrics to that song. I didn't recognize that kind of scene. He, who had always had all the answers, all the plans, all the controls, now had only questions. She looked at her son and saw something she had never seen clearly. Brightness, a raw shine, without filter, without expectation, just presence, inversion. The hall applauded. Really, not because they understood the rhythm, but because they felt the courage. They did not applaud the waitress, nor the boy. They applauded the gesture. They applauded the improbable. For the first time that night, it wasn't the billionaire who centered his eyes. It was the sun, and the brightness that emanated from it was such that for a moment no one remembered the disability. No one noticed the chair. No one saw the limits. Only greatness. Shame. The father stood up, astonished. He didn't say anything. He walked to the waitress, discreetly pulled out his wallet, took out a high bill and tried to hand it to her. She denied it, firmly, with tenderness. She looked at him as if to say, "This is not about money." But it was in simple words that she said what no one had dared to say before. "He didn't need help. I just needed an audience." And at that moment, something in the father broke. It broke without noise, but with impact. But what he didn't know yet, that was how much that phrase would haunt him for the next few days. Revelation. The hall still kept traces of astonishment. That small impromptu show had left something in the air, a different, lighter silence, as if the atmosphere had changed density. The boy was now breathing differently. His shoulders were no longer hunched. He hadn't said a word, but his whole body seemed to say, "Thank you for seeing me." Rhythm. The waitress, with the glasses still in her hands, took a step back and looked around. No one scolded her. No manager has spoken. No customer complained. It was as if, for a few seconds, time had given way. She returned the glasses to the tray, with the delicacy of someone who collects something sacred, and he walked again. But now, there was something new in her posture. She walked as if she knew the value of what she did, even if no one said it out loud. Observation. The father, still standing, did not return to his chair. He remained there in silence, watching his son laugh alone, repeating the gestures of the small presentation. It was as if he was trying to record that scene in his memory, as if he needed proof that it really happened. He didn't know what kind of force he had just witnessed. I only knew that it came from her, that woman who, without a position, without a stage, without a title, had given back to her son something he had never been able to offer: spontaneous dignity. Arouse. Later, already at home, he watched the video that one of the guests had filmed and sent him. For the first time, he looked at his own son without a feather filter, without the lens of effort. He saw only beauty, not beauty performed for others, but the beauty of those who insist on existing, even when the world pretends not to see. And along with the image came the memories: past birthdays, always tense, medical consultations, schools refusing to enroll, smiles that he did not know how to reciprocate. And there, alone, something broke again. But this time, it was inside. Perception. He realized that he had always tried to teach his son to adjust to the world, but it never encouraged him to challenge the world with his own light. He has always sought adaptation, never potency. The waitress, in minutes, did what he hadn't known how to do in years. She revealed what this boy carried in silence, a joy that resisted. And then, looking one last time at the screen of his cell phone, the father whispered to himself something he hadn't said in a long time. But it was in the silence of that night that he would find out how far this revelation would take him. Reflection. The next day dawned quieter than usual. The father did not go to the office. He canceled meetings, ignored emails, refused interviews. He stayed at home, sitting in front of his son's room, listening to the tiny sounds that came from within. Shy laughter, distorted sounds, fragments of joy. For the first time, he gave himself the right not to understand. Just listen. Without trying to fix it, without interrupting. Just listen. Revision. He opened the drawer of memories that he never had the courage to visit. Letters from schools that did not accept it. Medical reports with technical terms that hurt more than name-calling. Photos of birthdays where the boy was present, but never in the center. Everything there said more about him, the father, than about the child. Because, deep down, he never knew what to do with that love that didn't come ready. That required presence. That asked for more listening than solution. Reunion. In the late afternoon, he called his son to the garden. They sat together, without haste. The boy still had difficulty speaking, but his eyes said it all. The father, this time, did not dodge. He held his trembling hand gently, and for the first time, he apologized, not for specific mistakes, but by absences, in a hurry, by the distance, by the demand for a silence that he now understood as injustice. Recognition. At night, before going to sleep, the boy took out his cell phone and showed the video of the waitress banging her glasses. He repeated the scene as a ritual. Rhea. He imitated the gestures. The father, on the other side of the screen, smiled too. But inside, he cried, because that little improvised dance had become a symbol of something much bigger. There, in that simple moment, his son had been recognized as a subject, and that changed everything. Aperture. In the following days, the father began to change his routine. He visited rehabilitation centers. He listened to other parents. He spoke less. He listened more. He sent donations without his name. He financed projects that helped children like his son, but without a spotlight. It was a change that was born in the countryside. That did not need an announcement. What he sought now was not public redemption. It was intimate reconnection. And on one of those days, while having coffee in the lounge of the same restaurant, he heard a cutting comment from one of the managers about the waitress who had exaggerated. The blood ran cold. Something inside him rose, and that's when fate began to move its pieces, without anyone noticing. Change. It was not immediate. There was no announcement, no speech. It started in detail. A longer look, a touch without haste, a yes said before fear. The father, who had always spoken to be heard, now spoke to be understood. She started to follow her son's therapies, not as someone who supervises, but as someone who learns. He sat on the floor. I played the same games. I expected the same silences. And there, in naked coexistence, he realized that there was so much to discover and so much to undo. Aperture. She began to take her son to places she had previously avoided, noisy cafes, parks with other children, communal waiting rooms. The boy, for the first time, seemed to relax in his own father's arms, not for physical comfort, but because, in the end, that powerful man carried him without haste, without fear of being seen, as if to say, "This is my son, and I am whole with him." Reaction. People noticed. Not the famous name, not the armored car, not the known surname, but the delivery. The difference was in the small gestures, in the way he let the boy choose the music in the car, how he bent down to listen to a request with patience, how he repeated words so that his son would understand, all without haste. No audience, no marketing. The transformation was no longer internal. Now it was visible, and therefore, even more powerful. Impact. An unpretentious video of one of the outings went viral. It was the boy, dancing on his father's lap to the sound of an old song. The movements were minimal, but his eyes shone like someone dancing the world. Thousands of comments. People saying, "It made me cry. I remembered my father. That scene healed me." The father, in silence, read them all, and he decided not to answer any. That story was no longer just theirs. It was of those who needed to see that to believe that new beginnings are possible. Arouse. But while the world celebrated the recent gesture, he couldn't forget the origin of it all. The woman who touched the glasses, who dared to break the script, who saw her son before anyone else. He returned to the restaurant. He looked for her. It wasn't. He looked again. Nothing. He called the manager. The answer came dry. She was dismissed. He acted outside the protocol. The blood stopped for a second, and then boiled. And there, standing in the same hall where it had all begun, he understood what needed to be done. But what no one knew was the size of the gesture that would follow. Return. He came back, not as a customer, not as a celebrity. He came back as someone who carries a mission. The hall was the same. The lights, the smell, the cutlery lined up. But inside him, everything had changed. He walked to the front desk, looked into the manager's eyes, and asked, bluntly, "Where is she?" The answer came without hesitation. She was dismissed. Her attitude caused discomfort to some regulars. Silence, but not that silence that swallows up. Another type, one that expands, as if preparing space for the inevitable. He did not argue. He just smiled, a firm, almost bitter smile, and left. The next day, he returned. This time, with 2 lawyers and a proposal. He did not ask if the restaurant was for sale. He only presented the terms. The purchase was quick. Money was no object. Neither is the rush. He knew what he was doing. I was buying a stage and giving back a name. Reparation. The waitress was found days later, working elsewhere, wearing a uniform that erased her. When she saw him, she thought it was a mistake. She thought he was coming to apologize. But he didn't ask. Offered. A position. A space. A new role. "I want you to come back, but not as a waitress, as a social experience manager. I want you to turn that place into what it should have been for my son." Surprise. She did not respond immediately. There was silence, not of doubt, but of memory. She remembered the crossed looks, the feeling of invasion, the weight of doing the right thing and being punished. But she also remembered the boy's smile, of the dance of the glasses, from the instant when the world, for a second, opened up. And then, I said yes, not out of gratitude, but by purpose, for justice, renaissance. The restaurant reopened weeks later, with new management. The menu remained the same, but the pictures on the walls now displayed pictures of children with disabilities, wide smiles, spontaneous gestures, a small gallery of power. In the main corner, an image of the boy and the waitress side by side, both smiling, both erect, as if, finally, they occupied the space that was always denied to them. And there, between the dishes served and the new laughter, the father watched from afar, no longer as a center, but as support, as a base, as a bridge. But there was still one last gesture, one he had kept since the day of the dance, and that now, finally, it was ready to deliver. Arrival. The revolving door moved slowly, as if time inside obeyed other rules. The atmosphere remained the same, but he did not. The suit was just appearance. What he brought now was not status. It was silence, a silence full of purpose. He walked to the counter with the calm of someone who no longer needs to prove anything, only to correct what was distorted. Looks. No announcement was made, no recorded promises. But as the days passed, small signs began to emerge. The cold sculpture at the entrance was replaced by a living mural of stories. The chairs that had previously all been the same now included adapted models. It was not about charity. It was restoration. It was as if the space began, finally, to reflect the presence of those who had always been absent. Invitation. She found out from her sister, "That man is looking for you." He thought about ignoring it. He had learned to protect himself, not to create hopes where it has already been expelled, but there was something different. It was not a proposal. It was a call, not to return to the same place, but to redesign the place, with new edges, with another soul, with the look of someone who no longer bends over to fit. Acceptance. When he entered through the main door, he was not there. He found only an envelope on the table. Inside, a handwritten letter. Few lines, no apology. Only the recognition that matters. "You saw my son, before me, and with that, he taught me to see." She read it silently. He kept it in his pocket, and he climbed the stairs, as if going up to the stage of a story that is finally his. Reordering. Meetings with the team began the same week. She didn't speak loudly, but his presence filled the space. It brought new protocols, but also stories. He invited mothers of neurodivergent children to share experiences. He rewrote the way of serving, to listen, to welcome. He did not renovate walls. He reformed the way of being. The old customers were surprised. The new ones were moved. Gradually, the restaurant became something else, another place, another symbol. And in a discreet corner, behind the counter, a new photograph was hung, hands clasped, hers, the boy's, a moment without a date, but eternal in what it represented. In that image rested the gesture that he had not yet made, but now was about to happen. Closure. The restaurant operated quietly that morning, not because it was empty, but because it seemed to respect something bigger than sound. People spoke softly. The employees walked lightly. There was an air of reverence in the air, as if everyone, even without agreeing, knew that that day was not like the others. Preparation. He arrived early. He wore ordinary clothes, without marks. On his face, the serenity of someone who no longer needed armor. He greeted them one by one. He touched shoulders. He looked him in the eye, and then he walked to the back of the hall, where there was now a small stage of lightwood, not for speeches, but for meetings. He climbed up with his son in his arms. There was no formal audience, not even a microphone, only presences. The boy sat up, with help, on a cushion on the floor, and there he stayed, quiet, looking ahead. The father then took something out of his pocket, a folded paper, former, yellowish on the edges. It was the napkin of the night of the dance. The waitress had dropped it without realizing it. He kept it. He never had the courage to give it back. Delivery. He knelt before her, now seated among the staff, and held out the napkin with both hands, not as a gift, but as a symbol, a seal of truth. She understood. He took the paper, looked at it, then at the boy, and he nodded. There was forgiveness there, but above all, there was recognition, not the error, but it gives you the courage to do something new with him. Transformation, the hall applauded. No rehearsal, no exaggeration. It was an applause that did not celebrate a feat, but a crossing, a choice, a new story. From then on, everything was scheduled, not on the walls, but in the bodies, in the memory of those who saw it, in the breath of those who felt included. That space was no longer a restaurant. It was a second-chance sanctuary of legitimate presence, with a rescued voice. Legacy. The boy, still sitting, held out his hand to his father, not to ask, but to be thankful. The gesture was simple, but in it there was everything: affection, time, listening. The waitress, in the background, wiped her eyes without disguising it, not because of pain, but because, in that instant, he saw history line up, not as a miracle, but as justice. And before leaving, the father returned to the center of the room. He said nothing. He just bent down, touched the ground with the palm of his hand, and there he left the folded paper next to a flower, so that one day someone would enter there by chance and feel that in that place the truth danced. If this story touched something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to the channel. Activate the bell to receive more stories that inspire, heal, and provoke. Like us, it shows us that this type of storytelling needs to continue. Comment below. What did this story remind you of? What did she teach you? And share it with someone who needs to be seen, remembered, or simply welcomed. Because sometimes all you need is an audience that sees with their heart.